There's a man in Okinawa in his late 90s who still goes out to his field most mornings. Not because he has to, not for money. He goes because the vegetables need tending, and because people are expecting them, and because that is simply what he does. Ask him when he plans to stop, and the question doesn't quite make sense to him. There isn't a word for retirement in his language, and he is not unusual where he lives. Before we go further, a gentle note. This is general educational information about how people live, not medical or psychological advice, and not a substitute for a professional who knows your particular situation. Nothing here is a rule you're supposed to follow. It's simply a look at something the world's longest-lived people seem to understand, that many of the rest of us have quietly forgotten. Most of us carry a picture of how a life is supposed to go. You work. You work for decades. And somewhere out ahead there's a finish line called retirement, where the work finally stops and the reward begins. The reward, in this picture, is rest, an absence of obligation, a long-earned nothing. It's a powerful story, and for a lot of people, it's the thing that gets them through a hard week. The idea that one day, none of this will be required of you. But if you look at the places on Earth where people most reliably live to 100, that finish line is strangely missing. Not because those people can't afford to stop. In many cases, they simply don't. And more tellingly, the idea of stopping entirely doesn't seem to occur to them. For about 2 decades, researchers have studied a small number of places where people live remarkably long lives while staying active and sharp. The writer Dan Buettner, working with National Geographic and a team of researchers, called them blue zones. Places like Okinawa in Japan, Sardinia in Italy, Nicoya in Costa Rica, Ikigai in Greece. A great deal has been made of what these communities eat, and how much they move, and how tightly they hold on to their families and friends. All of that matters, and all of it is real. But there's a thread running through these places that gets far less attention than the food, and it's this. In the blue zones, people tend not to retire in the way we mean it. They keep doing. They keep being needed. They keep having a reason to get up in the morning, often well past the age when the rest of the world would have handed them a gold watch and sent them home. In Okinawa, there's a word for this. Ikigai. It's often translated, roughly, as the reason you get up in the morning. Not your job, not your income. The reason. The thing that makes waking up feel like it has a point. For that man in the field, Ikigai might be the vegetables and the people who depend on them. For someone else, it might be a grandchild, or a craft, or a role in the community that only they can fill. It is deeply personal, and it is rarely about money. Thousands of miles away, on the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, researchers found something so similar it's almost uncanny. There, they call it plan de vida, a plan for life, a sense of purpose, a reason to keep contributing. Different language, different continent, same quiet idea. A life goes better, and seems to go longer, when there is a reason inside it that pulls you forward. Now, it would be easy to hear all this and think the lesson is simply, keep working. But that misses it almost entirely, and it's worth being careful here. The people we're talking about are not grinding. They're not answering emails at 95. Many of them stopped paid employment long ago. What they didn't stop was being useful, being needed, and having something that asks for them each day. Purpose, in this sense, is not a career. It's not productivity. It's the sense that your existence still matters to someone or something outside of yourself. It can be tending a garden. It can be raising a grandchild. It can be teaching, mending, cooking for people, keeping an old skill alive, holding a small community together. The specific thing matters far less than the fact that it exists. And crucially, it is not something you retire from. You can retire from a job. It is much harder and much less healthy to retire from mattering. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Because this isn't only a nice sentiment. There's a real thread of research suggesting that a sense of purpose is associated with how well people age. Studies that follow large groups of older adults over many years have tended to find the same pattern. People who report a strong sense of purpose or meaning in their lives tend, on average, to stay healthier and more functional for longer than those who don't. Researchers are still working out exactly why, and it's genuinely complex. Purpose is tangled up with staying active, staying social, staying mentally engaged, and it's hard to separate the threads, but the association keeps showing up across different countries and different studies. Having a reason to get up appears to be, in some quiet way, protective. The body seems to respond to being needed. The psychologist Laura Carstensen at Stanford has spent a career studying how our relationship with time and meaning shifts as we age. One of the through lines of that work is that meaning doesn't fade in later life. If anything, people often get better at knowing what matters to them. The tragedy is when the world stops giving them a place to put it. And that points at something uncomfortable about the way many of us live now. We've built a model where purpose and work are bolted together, and then, on a single arbitrary day, both are switched off at once. For 40 years, your days have shape, your effort is wanted, people expect things of you. And then on a Friday, all of it stops, and you're handed the very thing our culture calls the reward. A long, open, unstructured nothing. For some people, that's genuinely wonderful, at least for a while. But for many, that sudden nothing turns out to be harder than anyone warned them. The rest, they were promised, arrives, and underneath it is a quieter question that no one prepared them for. What am I for now? The blue zones seem to sidestep this trap almost by accident, because they never bolted the whole of a person's purpose onto a job in the first place. The reason to get up was always bigger than the work, so when the work changes, the reason remains. I want to pause here, gently, because for some people this isn't an abstract idea. If you're listening to this and feeling the absence of that reason, if the mornings feel empty, or you've lost the sense of what you're for, or that quiet question feels less like philosophy and more like a weight you're carrying, please know that's a real and human thing, and it's worth taking seriously. A doctor or a qualified mental health professional can genuinely help with that, far more than any video can. Reaching for that kind of support is not a failure. It's one of the more sensible things a person can do. Understanding an idea is useful. It isn't the same as care, and it isn't meant to replace it. Here's the part I find genuinely hopeful, and it's the reason this isn't only a video about very old people in faraway places. Nothing about purpose requires you to be old. The reason to get up in the morning isn't something you unlock at 90. It's something you can be building right now, quietly, in the middle of an ordinary working life. A thing you tend, a person you show up for, a skill you keep alive, a small corner of the world that is better because you're paying attention to it. The people in the blue zones didn't find their purpose at the finish line. They carried it their whole lives and simply never put it down. Which means the useful question isn't, what will I do when I retire? It's a quieter one you can ask today. Beyond the job, beyond the tasks, what is the reason I get up in the morning? And am I giving it enough room to grow? You don't have to answer that this instant, but it's a better question than the one we're usually handed. And the earlier you start living inside it, the more room it has to become something that lasts. That man in Okinawa isn't in his field because a study told him to be. He's there because, to him, a life without a reason to go out in the morning isn't really the goal. The rest of us spend decades chasing a finish line. He never drew one. And there may be more wisdom in that than in all our plans to escape. If this gave you a new way to think about what you're actually working toward, consider sending it to someone who's counting down to a finish line of their own. And come back and tell me, in the comments, what gets you up in the morning beyond the things you have to do. I read every one of these, and I think the answers matter more than we admit. One last time, gently, because it matters. What we've talked about today is general information about how people live and age, not medical or psychological advice, and not tailored to your situation. If any of this touches something heavier for you, please talk with your own doctor or a qualified professional who can support you properly. Because in the end, the goal was never to reach a day when nothing is asked of you. The goal is to have something worth getting up for, and to keep it close, for as long as you possibly can.